This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my co-host, friend, and compadre,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And we're discussing what to talk about today. And after exploring a lot of different things on the farther sides of awareness and non-duality, we decided to go back to the basics with Ramana Maharshi and see if I can pronounce this correctly. But no, you pronounce it, so I don't make a fool of myself.
Nisargadatta Maharaj.
There we go. Thank you. Of course, I'm familiar with both of them, but you're much more familiar with both of them. And I have a bunch of questions. You have a bunch of answers. But we want to really help people get back to some of the basics of what non-duality is and how it started through these two incredible teachers. So do you have any, for listeners who don't know them well, do you have any brief history of both of them, like when they lived, when they died, et cetera, like that?
Sure. They both lived in the 20th century in India, and neither of them spoke English as far as I know, but there were a lot of English-speaking followers of them. And Paul Brunton wrote a book where he talked about Ramana Maharshi, and Somerset Maugham wrote a novel with a character based on him. Ramesh Balsekar was Indian and English speaker, and he was a follower of Nisargadatta, and many of his followers brought this teaching to the US. And when I first began my spiritual search, the first things I learned about, at least the first things that actually had an effect on me, that weren't what I consider blind alleys, were the teachings of Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta, both who have similarities in that they taught self-inquiry, or looking at the I, asking, in Ramana's case, who am I? And in Nisargadatta's case, staying with the sense I am. And I found this very helpful. And you and I have talked a lot about the two wings analogy, where one wing is helping the person to more effectively live in the world with others, and the other was the spiritual search of looking inside and finding your true nature. And so we've been talking a lot about the one wing, and I thought it would be good to go back to basics to the other wing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds good. Something I only know of their lives peripherally, but I find it always interesting when you are learning about people who are almost not human in a certain way. They become like divine beings in interesting ways. You could say that about Ram Dass's guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and there's others throughout history, of course. But they often have unusual or interesting quirks along with being part God-like. Ramana never left his a 1 mile area, if I remember right.
Yeah, later in life, he set up on the outskirts of Arunachala, a mountain in Tiruvannamalai in India. And I don't think he ever left after he arrived.
And he thought of that mountain kind of like as his mother or something. Does this make any sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the mother part. He may have, but he thought of it as divine, or a representation of the divine.
Yeah. And, I spent some time with Sai Baba, who is also considered divine being, and he had an elephant that he thought of as divine. So these people can be a little bit unusual. Nisargadatta, I know, is a chain smoker, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he lived above his tobacco shop, his beedi shop, and yeah, he smoked. So he had his particular quirks. Also, he was famous for being quite vehement and sometimes even angry when he would, or let's just say, passionate. When he would speak to the people, whereas Ramana Maharshi often sat in silence for a long, long time, and occasionally answered questions.
So some of my bad habits don't disqualify me from being a divine being?
Well, I don't think so, but
Okay.
it's not that you yourself are the divine being in terms of the body of Jonathan, but
I always forget that.
your true nature that knows the body is the one single divine being. At least that's, what I believe is called the self, the one true universal consciousness.
Now I know you know several philosophical underpinnings and ideas from both these teachers that you can go into some depth about. I'm wondering what you learned in your research.
Well, I did a little review of the core concepts of the two of them and sort of did a comparison and a contrast. And I came up with
Admit
nine.
it, you use Chat GPT. I know
Actually,
you don't.
yeah, the secret is out. I took a little tip from you,
Uh-huh.
and I went to Chat GPT. Although I have read much about both of these people, but I thought it'd be nice to get it in one place. And I said, what are the core teachings of Ramana Maharshi? And then also another, what are the core teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj? And it was very useful and very interesting and helpful
Uh-huh.
as a reminder and as an organizing principle. And
Before AI takes over the world, it will at least help us know our spiritual foundations, hopefully.
well, like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Right,
And
right,
I consider this a good use, especially since it wasn't like I was taking an exam I was cheating on or anything like that.
right. So let's start with that. What are some of the things that you saw?
Well, first, I want to say that many of the principles overlap one another because really the core teaching is all about identity. And
Mm.
so when we talk about our true nature, we talk about ego, they do overlap, but there are subtle distinctions. The first principle is self inquiry, which I mentioned before. Ramana Maharshi called it Atma Vichara as a direct path. And his central teaching is to ask, who am I? And to trace the sense of I back to its source. And he taught that when the ego subsides, the self, which is pure awareness, remains. And
Good.
Nisargadatta similarly said, stay with the sense I am, abide in the raw feeling of being before attaching any identity, like I am this or I am that. It's just I am. And he thought this was the gateway to the absolute.
You know what I find interesting, as we've talked about, is that different things work for different people. So self-inquiry, Ramana Maharshi style, always worked for me, especially more of the phrasing "What am I?"
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Nisargadatta, how do you say it?
Nisargadatta.
Nisargadatta, his thinking of stay with the eye never did anything for me. Like stay with the eye, what's that mean?
The
So
sense of I am is how he
a
called
sense
it.
of I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've heard people say that really made the difference for them. So everybody has to find their way. But I love how both of them are really focusing on what is your identity. And I think when I interviewed a couple very enlightened people, including Adyashanti, they said the best way to define enlightenment is that you change your identity from your personality to your awareness.
Yes.
And I like that definition. And it's something that can happen in a big fell swoop or can happen 20 times a day in a moment.
Yes,
And that makes it very practical.
I think so too. I think so too. And as a matter of fact, Adyashanti, I remember him once saying that the book by Nisargadatta, or it was a collection of his conversations called IAmThat,
Mhm.
was very influential in his uh, early life. And that's probably one of the first and most famous books that the West read that
Yeah.
brought this kind of teaching to outside of India.
Uh-huh. I also find it interesting. I took a 6-day Tony Robbins seminar recently, and whether you love him or hate him, he's been around for 40 years as the top speaker in that field, whatever you call it, motivational peak performance. And he also talks a lot about identity. And he has kind of different tools for changing people's identity. But I think whether you're trying to be happier more through positive psychology or spirituality, it's really a lot of it comes down to changing who you think you are and what you identify as being you.
That's absolutely right. And it's interesting that you note that about Tony Robbins, because I've noticed many teachers who started out in a more general way have incorporated non-dual teachings, especially identity teachings, similar
Mm-hmm.
to Ramana and Nisargadatta, into their current teachings.
Yeah, yeah. And for better or worse, it's spread and sometimes diluted the purity of identifying with our true nature as awareness. But I still think it's useful to expand or look at our limited identities and see how we can make them closer and perhaps one with the sense of us being pure awareness.
Yeah, that is the aim, if
Mhm.
there is such a thing as an aim, which we might
Right.
get into,
At
which we
least
might
it's
get
the,
into later,
yeah.
because aims can be misleading. I'll get to that in the fifth point, but the next
Okay.
three points are actually all really related: true nature, ego, and identity. But there's some slight subtlety among them. True nature, Nisargadatta said, your true nature is the formless, timeless awareness, that the
Hmm.
essential I is not the body mind, but the pure witnessing consciousness.
Hmm.
And Ramana said, when the ego subsides, the self, pure awareness remains. And we think of ourselves as our body, our mind, our personality, etc. And when we look inside to that which never changes and that which knows all experience and see that as our true nature, then we start to notice that the nature of that true the nature of our true nature is is love, allowing, acceptance, peace,
All good things.
all good things. And the third one is ego, which is of course related, but the interesting and I think telling point about this is that they both thought of it the same way. Ramana said the ego is a bundle of thoughts.
Mm.
And we forget that. We forget that the sense of who we are as a person is all thought. And the root thought is I. And so he said, attend to this root, and the ego dissolves. And similarly, Nisargadatta said, the personal self, ego, is a mental construct. What we call me is a bundle of thoughts, memories, desires, and fears, not our true nature.
You know, I take exception with that you should focus on the sense of I because what you focus on grows. And when I think of focusing on the sense of I think of it as the character of Jonathan, which then becomes more like, oh, I'm this individual moving through the world. Whereas when I say focus on witnessing or the background of awareness or something like that, I think that is a different approach.
Yeah, well, you've really hit on why this teaching has many misunderstandings attached to it,
Mm-hmm.
and why what they call neti, not this, not this, that practice is so important. Because when we ask, who am I? We come up with answers that are practically always related to the person, to the
Yeah.
individual. And the trick is to see that all of those are appearances in something else, something that's
Mm-hmm.
bigger, something that is actually infinite, that all appears in. And it's going back and back and back in that infinite regression, that anything we can name is known, and what is the knower, and as you said, the witness. So if that works better for you, being the witness, I think it's the same thing and more direct if it works for you.
Yeah, yeah. The way I got exposed to Ramana's teaching if you remember, was through Punjaji. I was not familiar at all with that. I was in India and everybody said, oh, you should meet this teacher, Punjaji. And I didn't, in fact, what happened was he asked me, who are you? And I started saying all these identities. I'm an author, I'm a husband, I'm a writer, all this. He kept shaking his head. And it wasn't until I shut up and looked him in the eye that I got it in a very dramatic way. So you have to use kind of the neti approach, like, no, we're not that, and let this other thing kind of erupt or unfold or I don't know what word you'd use, but it's behind all those other identities that we might think of ourselves as.
Yeah, that's a great story, a great description, and I'm a little envious that you were there in person. The Punjaji of whom you speak is H.W.L. Punja, known by his nickname Papaji, and he was one of the major. He spoke English, and so he had a huge following in India, and a lot of people learned from him and brought it to the U.S. and Europe, including Gangaji and many, many more.
Yeah, a lot of teachers, famous teachers, were impacted from him. And it was interesting going to his place and seeing him in person, because he looked like he was about to explode in bliss, like he was barely able to hold it together. And sometimes he'd just start laughing, or something. But it was definitely fun to meet him.
There was a lot of laughter. I mean, I've watched many, many satsangs of Papaji, and there's a lot of laughter, including a couple videos that I put on a YouTube playlist called Spiritual Laughter, where Papaji and the person asking him a question can't stop laughing.
Yeah, you're right. Anyway, so what's next on this list of basics?
Well, identity, again, following in a similar theme, Nisargadatta said, disidentify from the body and mind,
Uh-huh,
recognizing that the body and mind happens to you, awareness, not as you.
uh-huh,
And it really is that shift in identity that is the key. And the only way is to look with curiosity at what knows your experience, what has always known your experience, what has never changed ever since you were a little kid, or what in your experience never changes. And that's pure awareness, or I, or self, or the absolute, or whatever name you want to give it. And all names have to eventually be dropped as well.
uh-huh. Yeah, I call mine Frederick.
And Frederick is known by what?
Frederick just knows everything. So,
And who knows Frederick?
uh, oh, that's Bob. That's God.
Or dog. He's,
Yeah,
he's in
right,
your
right,
book, Conversations with Dog.
right.
The fifth one is one that dear to my heart. I just call it already. And I think this is a really important point. Ramana said the self is ever present and already realized, that liberation is not something new to be attained, that the self is our natural state and only ignorance veils it. And by ignorance, he means, I believe, thinking about the past, thinking about the future.
Hmm.
And that realization is the recognition of what already is. And in a similar vein, Nisargadatta said, self-realization is recognizing you were always the self. Nothing new is gained, illusion falls away.
Yeah. Being somewhat of an achiever, and we live in a achievement-oriented Western civilization, I think this is a hard thing for people to get, that you're not getting something, you're losing something that is interfering with peace.
Exactly. And that is hard to get because
Yeah.
everything that we're trained with, our entire culture, is about what we're going to get from the outside world in terms of learning, in terms of acquisitions, in terms of success, in terms of our own reputation, etc. It's all stuff we get, and that's illusion. Those are the veils, the covering something that's already here. I think of it as our default state. I mean,
Yeah.
happiness is our default state, only covered up by all this incessant thinking about the past and the future and what's wrong with
Hmm.
with the world, with others, and with yourself.
Yep. That's a good summary. What's next?
Desire and fear. Many people have talked about it in different terms, like pulling towards you or pushing away.
Hmm.
I think that Hale Dwoskin has another term for it. Uh,
Aversion and something.
yeah. Attachment and aversion. And it's desire and fear, meaning you want something that you don't have to bring toward yourself, or you want to prevent something from happening. It's pulling towards you or pushing away. Nisargadatta said, desire and fear sustain the sense of individuality. When desire and fear weaken, the personal self loosens and the natural self becomes obvious.
Which leads to one of my favorite quick pointers that works for me is a technique I actually got from Craig Hamilton. And that was the simple pointer: in this moment, have no preferences.
Yeah,
And if, of course, we can't do that, but as you do try to do that and you're imitating that, then the attachments and aversions disappear. And really what you're left with is pure awareness to the moments that you can do that. And it's a very subtle technique. Like, in this moment, try to have no preferences whatsoever. And it's really a meditative technique when you come down to it. And it's
absolutely.
powerful. It's
Very
powerful.
powerful. And I think that the subtlety of it actually dovetails with the previous point of already, because the people have difficulty sometimes with no preferences because they have preferences. Were they going to pretend that you don't like stuff and dislike others?
Hmm.
And that makes it challenging. But the sense that your true nature is already here, that there is something within you that's already here that already allows everything to be as it is. And
Which is another meditative phrase:
exactly,
allow everything to be exactly as it is. That's kind
exactly.
of like taking it from the other side of the other angle.
That's right. But sometimes when the Brian character is trying to allow everything as it is and is not succeeding, what helps me is seeing that my the big I, as opposed to the little me, that which knows all experience, already allows everything to be. So
Right.
just drop back and be that allowing which is already here. And it takes the pressure off the individual who has to then do something against its nature. Yeah, forget about it. Just notice that all appears in awareness, and awareness is like a clear mirror that doesn't decide what to reflect, it reflects everything.
Hmm. Yeah. I like something that Fred Davis says, which he says, people think that you can become enlightened, but there is no, you never become enlightened. You are the thing in the way of enlightenment. So you don't become enlightened.
Uh-huh.
Enlightenment already is. When you get out of the way, it will be there.
Yes. But the mind can't comprehend this.
Right,
That's the
right,
problem.
right.
And that's why thoughts, the verbal stream that's going through our mind, isn't the thing that's leading us there.
Yeah.
It's what's that verbal stream talking to? Who notices that?
Uh-huh.
And that leads me to the next point in my list, which is silence. And this is mostly on the Ramana Maharshi side. I don't believe Nisargadatta talked about this because, from what I could gather, he really um, liked to talk and liked conversation. Ramana said silence is the purest teaching. Or maybe he didn't say that, maybe he just simply demonstrated that.
Yeah, if he's blabbing over and over again that silence is the greatest teaching, it's a little bit getting in the way of the teaching.
Yeah, Ramana emphasized that the true teaching happens in silence, not through words, and that
Mm-hmm.
silence communicates the presence and the clarity of the self directly. And there is something to be said for silence. Blank pause.
There's something to be said for silence. I like
Isn't
that
that isn't
oxymoron.
that a totally incongruous phrase? Yeah, there's a famous story about people who wanted to interview Ramana Maharshi.
Yeah.
He finally agreed to be interviewed, and they brought a tape recorder in. But these people were devotees who were so intimidated by the master that
Yeah.
they sat hoping that he would start, and he didn't. And they were too afraid to ask a question. So they sat there for an hour in silence. So there's a tape recording somewhere in the world that exists or existed
Uh-huh.
of people sitting with Ramana Maharshi, and it's just silent.
Yeah. Interview with Ramana Maharshi. Nothing's there but the silence. That would be good. I wonder if it's charged in a special way. That would be interesting.
I wonder. I wonder. It may be.
So what's next on our Chat GPT final countdown?
The eighth one, second to last, is play of consciousness versus non-doership. Ramana said the world is a projection of the mind. When the mind is still, the world disappears as something separate. I don't
Ah,
think he meant it disappears, it goes away, but its separateness from you, from your true nature, is what disappears. The idea that there's me and the world and they're two separate things, that all is one, that what remains is the self, the soul reality.
I've just in the last couple of years, I started to have more of that experience where that made total sense.
Yeah.
Prior to the last couple of years, I understood we are all one, and sometimes on a drug or after meditation retreats, I understand that. But now it's more like something that I can slip into more easily throughout the day. And it's not a fireworks experience. It's more of a, well, that's just how it is experience. It's a different experience, but it is something that's more accessible. And I'm wondering how that is for you, like how that progression has happened for you.
Yeah, that I have seen that progression as well. And it happens when I look at awareness. I start with what's in awareness, just the, a little
Uh-huh.
inventory. There's the feeling of my body, there's sounds, there's thoughts, there's emotions. These are all in awareness. And I look at awareness itself and I see that nothing that I experience, nothing that I can experience, nothing that I have ever experienced or ever will appears outside of awareness, and that it's not two awarenesses. There's not an awareness for sound and awareness for the body sensations. When I imagine what I hear and what I feel in my body as being in the one awareness, that sort of generates that sense, and it becomes nonverbal, that
Hmm.
sense that all is awareness and there's only awareness and all is one.
Yeah, and I think each person has to find their low-hanging fruit for how to experience that. You can
Yes,
talk about it, but it's very easy to get caught up in the concepts of it when it's the most obvious thing. Like if we were trying to understand the concept of air and we had hundreds of books talking about air, you would eventually start debating about air and dividing it up in different ways, but air is the most obvious thing, and that's why it's when you write about or talk about it, it can take you away from these simple experience that everything is in air for us.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's like the old metaphor of the fish swimming around looking for water,
Right,
not
right.
realizing it's all water.
Uh-huh.
And
Good.
that's awareness. It's all. And I mean, there's some teachers who follow these two that we're talking about today who believe that there is nothing but awareness, that all is awareness. Wayne Lickerman, who was 2 generations down from Nisargadatta, opened most of his talks with consciousness is all there is.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that in the era of AI, that there's an increased interest in what consciousness is from the scientific community, because they're trying to figure out what is consciousness. Does AI have any of it? Can you build consciousness into AI? And there's a lot of interest just from a totally new field of scientists, because people are realizing it is the most mysterious thing and does seem to underlie everything. And we have no clue as to what it is in some ways.
That's right. The hard problem of consciousness, as it's been called many times. And I think one of the difficulties is the thinking that we have consciousness, that consciousness resides in the brain
Okay.
somehow, or is created by the brain, and as opposed to consciousness is what all appears in and pervades all.
Yeah. There's an interesting book, I don't know if you read it, Brian, called After by Bruce Grayson. He's a psychiatrist that studied near-death experiences for 50 years. And he was very much a skeptic. And he recently came out with actually a really good article about how our materialistic view of consciousness does not fit with the data. You know, people often have experiences of themselves outside of their body, for example, or knowing things in the past or the future, and all kinds of near-death experiences. And in it, he's talking a lot about what is consciousness. And the same with the new book by Dan Brown, which is called The Secret of Secrets. Have you read that one? I
Yes, I
think you
have.
have. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so there's more interest from various fields, whether after life experiences or Dan Brown or AI, where a lot of focus now is going into what is consciousness. And I think that that's going to eventually have a big impact in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup has written a great deal about it, that consciousness is the underlying principle that of which all things are made, as opposed to materialism. I think they call it idealism versus materialism. It's pretty interesting, but it's all interesting as long as we understand, or as long as we see that thinking about it is not the same as being it, as experiencing the being of it,
Yeah.
the identification.
Or Ram Dass once said, you can't know consciousness, you can only be consciousness.
Oh, that's excellent. I didn't realize he said that. I thought I made
Yeah.
that up because I always say you can't see it, you can only be it.
You're stealing from Ram Dass.
I
Well, if you're going
must
to
have
steal stuff, at least steal from somebody who's
steal
dead who
from the
won't sue you.
best. Oh, no. You never know. So anyway, let's move on to the last one, number 9,
Uh-huh.
which is the absolute. And this was a phrase that Nisargadatta used. And he called it the absolute, or para Brahman. And he said it's beyond consciousness. He said, even the sense I am is not the ultimate. Awareness of being arises in the absolute, which cannot be described. And, this is touching on points that we've already made here,
Mm-hmm.
that words, concepts, ideas aren't it. They're known by something that is wordless, that is conceptless, that is infinite, that is all inclusive. And he called it the absolute, but even the absolute is a word that
Yeah.
appears in that wordless field of knowingness, which you are.
One of my favorite techniques of yours in your book, Awareness Games, was uh, see the world through wordlessness, kind of like as a 1-year-old might. And that immediately takes me to a different view of the world. And it's a powerful technique. So thank you for that.
Sure, yeah. I think that both of those wordlessness, like what can I notice about my experience without using words to describe it? And the related game that you mentioned, which is which is imagine that you're just born. I call it the just born identity,
Right, right.
that you have no ideas, no thoughts yet, no conclusions of the world. You're just experiencing everything for the first time,
I
fresh.
like I like putting those two together because they kind of are like peanut butter and chocolate. They work well together.
You're right. I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. They are perfect together.
Hmm. So, anything else, or are we ready for the meditation?
Well, I just wanted to say that talking about these folks, Nisargadatta and Ramana Maharshi, I just want to say that I am not a scholar or an expert on Advaita Vedanta or Indian philosophy or history or anything like that. So all of this is, my interpretation with a little help of Chat GPT. So if I've gotten anything wrong or any of the pronunciations wrong, I
We can blame
apologize.
Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, with that said, I do have a guided meditation, which I think is related or influenced by their self-inquiry techniques. I call it, "What is this I?"
And right before you go into that, I think, you know, if you look at in any field, the experts are always going back to the basics.
Yes.
And in the field of non-duality, we gotta really know what those are, because anytime we get too far into concepts or ideas or debates or this is how it is, you're starting to miss the actual experience. So I appreciate
Mhm.
going into the kind of the greatest hits of the foundations of non-duality. So we're reminded of what really is the basic things that we need to focus on.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, if we really wanted to go even deeper and earlier, it's not like these guys invented it. I mean, if you read Upanishads,
Yeah.
this is all there.
Hmm.
So it's not something new that they invented. It's just that they were the folks from whom Westerners most often got it and brought it back.
Right, right. So with
That
that,
said,
I'm very curious as to how you'll guide us on meditation.
okay, as always, start by taking a nice, easy, deep breath and closing your eyes if it's safe to do so. To yourself, silently say the word I. 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 Without adding any other words, see if you can feel into the felt sense of I. Get curious. What is I pointing to? See if you can get a sense of that which knows your experience. See if you can get a feel for what has known all of your experience ever since you were a little child and which has never changed. It's always the same I. What is this I? Let answers arise, whatever they may be. Whatever answers arise, see if you can sense that they are objects appearing within I. For instance, if you feel the answer is this body, ask, what is aware of this body? See that the body appears in I. I does not appear in the body. If you feel the answer is my mind, ask, what is aware of my mind? See that the mind appears in I. I does not appear in the mind. If you feel the answer is my personality, ask, what is aware of my personality? See that the personality appears in I. I does not appear in the personality. Now, let's get even more subtle. If you feel the answer is awareness, ask, is awareness something that can be known? What knows awareness? Let whatever other ideas come in answer to the question, what is this I? For any answer that is a word, see that the word is an object that appears in I. For any answer that is an image, see that the image is an object that appears in I. For any answer that is a concept, see that the concept is an object that appears in I. I is. I is being. Being is effortless. Being is already happening. Rest there. Step back into being. Rest in being. Be being. Rest in and as the I that has no name and no form, but effortlessly knows all objects and all experiences. Be that rest. Be that I. Be beingness. Be wordless, choiceless, all-including, all-allowing I. Drop even the word being. See that even beingness is just a word, an object, an objectless I. 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 Drop even the word I. Rest. Be. Now, take another nice, easy, deep breath. And at your own pace, begin to open your eyes.
Okay. Do I have to come back?
No.
Okay.
I can just sort of conclude the podcast without you, but I'd rather have you here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I want to put a shout out to our Patreon supporters. If you want to support us, go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. We've been turning out a lot of good stuff to our Patreon supporters. And thanks to you, you're doing that. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, a little extra clips from most of the people we interview, and sometimes deep dives and articles and all kinds of bloopers too.
And we are very, very grateful for your support.
Yeah. So I think that wraps up this one. I encourage our listeners to get back to basics, and mention a few different techniques today. Maybe put that on a post-it note where you'll see it so that you are reminded throughout the week.
Yeah, I always liked La Kelly's phrase, remember to remember.
Remember to remember. Yeah. Or don't forget to remember. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we really appreciate your support and your listening. And feel free to pass this on to people you know. And until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.